They say the eyes are the windows to the soul, but what if you looked into someone's gaze and found nothing staring back? Not sadness, not anger, just emptiness. An eerie void where something essential should be. This isn't science fiction. It's a quietly growing suspicion whispered through corridors of ancient knowledge, reinforced by unsettling modern research. A chilling 20% of corporate leaders, those shaping the world around us, show traits eerily close to what we'd classify as psychopathy. That's not a mild deviation from the norm. It's 5 times higher than what we'd expect in the general population. These aren't back-alley criminals or horror movie villains. These are people in suits behind polished conference tables, making decisions that ripple through economies and lives. But what's truly at play here isn't just psychology. It's something deeper, something darker, something spiritual. These aren't simply flawed personalities. Some thinkers propose they might not be entirely human. Not in the metaphysical sense, anyway. Not because they lack flesh or bone, but because they lack something invisible, something crucial. The soul. Modern marketing knows exactly how to reach into that invisible part of us. It's not just about selling soap or sneakers. It's about cultivating emotional cravings. Ads don't show you products. They sell you emptiness, then promise to fill it, if only temporarily. The more you buy, the more disconnected you feel. That hollowness growing inside, that's not just overconsumption or burnout. It might be something far more alarming, a signal from your spiritual core that something unnatural is pressing in from all sides. This isn't merely philosophy. Neuroscience now confirms what mystics suspected long ago. Our hyper-connected digital world is strangling the very part of the brain responsible for empathy. The part that feels for others, that sees another's tears and doesn't just understand them, but shares in their pain. Research shows that, since the year 2000, empathy among young adults has dropped nearly 40%. That's not just a generational quirk, that's collapse. And this collapse lines up precisely with the rise of smartphones, social media, and relentless screen exposure. Is this all accidental? Or is it something closer to a coordinated campaign against human consciousness? Some thinkers propose that certain frequencies emitted by digital devices don't just distract, they erode our spiritual defenses. These tools we hold in our hands might be doing more than shortening our attention spans. They could be severing the invisible cords that connect us to our higher selves. Suddenly, that phrase soulless being doesn't feel like poetic hyperbole. It begins to feel like diagnosis. Helena Blavatsky, the controversial yet influential figure behind Theosophy, wrote about this long before the internet existed. Her works described individuals who, while appearing completely normal on the surface, were actually spiritual voids, biological shells walking among us. These weren't metaphors to her. They were real entities, she claimed, with no divine spark, no immortal center. They functioned, they spoke, they held jobs, some even held power, but they were spiritually inert. And whether or not you agree with Blavatsky's cosmology, what can't be denied is her ideas found strange validation in the modern concept of the philosophical zombie. In the realm of contemporary philosophy, these theoretical beings behave exactly like humans in every outward sense, except for one critical missing piece: consciousness. They react, speak, make decisions, but there's no someone behind the eyes. This idea, often discussed in academic terms, suddenly echoes the haunting warnings of esoteric thinkers who lived centuries ago. If you've ever felt an inexplicable chill in someone's presence, sensed a weird detachment beneath their politeness, or walked away from an interaction feeling spiritually drained for no clear reason, you may have brushed up against such an individual. You may have stood face to face with a living shell, someone not possessed by evil in the dramatic sense, but simply devoid of the light you instinctively expect to find in others. And the terrifying part? This state might not be exclusive to a handful of anomalies. Esoteric teachings suggest it's something that can happen gradually to almost anyone. Soul loss, they warn, isn't always immediate. It can occur through slow erosion, day by day, compromise by compromise, forgetting your inner truth, denying your higher calling, numbing your pain instead of healing it. Each act might weaken that sacred bridge that connects your mind to your spirit until one day, it simply breaks. Once broken, the body goes on. The mind continues. But the presence is gone, and in its absence, a vacancy, a space that nature, in her hatred for emptiness, will not leave untouched. Forces of unknown origin may take residence, guiding the body with intentions not its own. Possession isn't just the stuff of horror movies. In many indigenous and mystical traditions, it's the natural consequence of becoming spiritually hollow. Gnostic teachings from early Christianity proposed a hidden spiritual hierarchy that mirrors this eerie vision. According to them, not all people are spiritually equal. They described three kinds of humans. First, the pneumatics, those awakened souls capable of divine connection. Then, the psychics, the ordinary people, still asleep but capable of awakening. And finally, the hylix, those so deeply enmeshed in material reality that the soul's light was no longer reachable. Not metaphorically, but quite literally unreachable. This classification wasn't invented for theological debate. It was a warning. From Blavatsky to the shamans of Siberia, from Norse mythology to Egyptian Hermeticism, the message remains consistent. There have always been those among us who seem human in form, yet something fundamental is absent. Whether you call them the walking dead, philosophical zombies, empty vessels, or biological puppets, the intuition is the same. These individuals mirror humanity but lack its essence. One might argue this is just spiritual paranoia, but even clinical psychology unintentionally supports pieces of this unsettling picture. Conditions like extreme narcissism or alexithymia, the inability to identify or express emotions, are often described as empty or hollow by those who study or experience them. Even Carl Jung observed that some people live entirely through personas, layers of social masks hiding a complete absence of an inner self. So, what's left when the masks fall? What remains when all the automatic scripts and social behaviors are stripped away? For some, nothing, just mechanics. And mechanics can be manipulated. Some esoteric schools suggest that soulless individuals, because they lack that internal divine compass, are ideal tools for darker forces seeking to influence our world. They obey orders without the burden of conscience. They make decisions without emotional hesitation. And because they lack the inner resistance that a true soul might offer, they are perfect carriers for agendas that would horrify a spiritually intact person. These aren't conspiracy theories in the modern sense. They are spiritual observations, reflections on the nature of power, control, and spiritual absence. If you begin to accept this possibility, even just as a mental exercise, it casts a new light on many things, on institutional cruelty, on the emotionally sterile culture of high finance, on corporate decisions that ruin lives with no visible remorse. It also explains that lingering discomfort you might feel when watching certain public figures speak, that instinct that says, there's something not right about them. It could be that your spirit is picking up on something your rational mind can't yet define. And here's the most dangerous part. You are not immune. This isn't about others, some shadowy elite or distant cabal. This is about your soul, your connection to higher truth, your spiritual health in a world increasingly designed to strip it away. Because the erosion of empathy and consciousness doesn't happen all at once. It's death by 1,000 small choices, scrolling instead of meditating, consuming instead of creating, numbing instead of feeling. Every time you turn away from your own intuition, you give up a little bit more of what makes you whole, until finally, the person in the mirror may still look like you, but something essential is missing behind the eyes. So how do you resist? How do you rebuild the bridge? That answer isn't quick, but it exists. It begins with awareness, with choosing discomfort over numbness, presence over distraction, truth over convenience. Because in a world increasingly full of empty shells, your soul is not just your compass, it's your only defense. When was the last time you truly felt someone's presence, real, raw, undeniably alive? Not just physical proximity or a pleasant conversation, but that rare and magnetic human depth that vibrates from a soul actively connected to its higher nature. For many, that experience is becoming rarer by the year. And it's not just because people are busy or distracted, it's because something deeper, something invisible, is slipping away from the fabric of who we are. This quiet erosion is not just personal, it's planetary, and it's accelerating. We now live in a world where being emotionally numbed is not an anomaly, it's practically a social requirement. Think about it. Corporate culture doesn't reward those who feel deeply. It champions cold efficiency, ironclad logic, and emotional detachment disguised as professionalism. The people who rise the fastest often aren't those with warm hearts, but those with the least friction, people who can execute harsh decisions without blinking. This isn't just a cultural drift, it's a symptom, a signal of something profoundly broken. The question we rarely ask is why this kind of personality is favored so consistently across institutions. Why are those who lack emotional depth so often placed in positions of influence? Why do they dominate industries, governments, and even spiritual communities? The esoteric answer is chilling. It's because those devoid of soul are easier to control. Without a deep inner compass, they're more susceptible to external programming. They become conduits, mouthpieces for forces that thrive in spiritual absence. According to ancient teachings, the soul is not guaranteed at birth. It's not an automatic feature of having a human body. It must be cultivated, grown, strengthened through conscious effort and sacred choice. And just as it can be built up, it can also wither. It can even disappear. Helena Blavatsky wasn't the first to suggest this, but she was one of the most direct. She described what she called the living dead, humans in appearance entirely vacant inside. No divine spark, no spiritual center, just routine, reaction, and surface-level engagement with the world. These weren't inherently evil people. That's not the point. What makes this condition so alarming is not malevolence, but absence. They're not animated by demonic force. They're simply uninhabited, empty, and therefore vulnerable. Like an abandoned house waiting for anything or anyone to walk in and take up residence. In some Tibetan traditions, there's a belief in beings called njoras, individuals who have mastered the ability to leave their body at will, temporarily, intentionally. During that absence, their body is a vessel, available for occupation. In ordinary people, however, this vacancy is not intentional. It's not disciplined spiritual practice. It's abandonment, sometimes triggered by trauma, sometimes by years of disconnection. And when that happens, the door doesn't close behind them. It stays ajar. Shamanic cultures from Siberia to the Americas speak of soul loss in hauntingly similar terms. In these traditions, traumatic events, profound grief, or spiritual violations can cause fragments of the soul to detach. A person may continue to breathe, speak, go to work, but something vital has fled. These broken individuals are often described as wandering through life half alive, emotionally hollow, and spiritually disoriented. Many traditional healing practices are devoted to retrieving these lost parts, because without them, the person is a shadow of their former self. Even ancient Egypt, through its Hermetic writings, warned of the separation between different aspects of the soul. The Ka and the Ba could split. Under certain conditions, the body might live, but the higher consciousness, what they considered the true self, could vanish. Norse mythology offered another warning. The Draugr were not ghosts. They were physical bodies still animated, yet their souls were gone. They walked, they fought, they remembered, but they no longer felt. A lifeless presence propped up by some twisted form of energy. This consistency across cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, cannot be brushed off as coincidence. They were all pointing to a shared truth, seen through different lenses. A truth that speaks to the fragility of the human soul and its capacity to vanish without leaving any physical trace. And in today's hyper-technologized world, the risk is no longer theoretical. We've created an ecosystem that actively cultivates spiritual detachment. Our rituals are gone, replaced by routines. Our silence has been replaced with endless noise. And most dangerously, our attention, the currency of consciousness itself, has been hijacked by devices that serve no higher purpose than to keep us consuming. If the soul is a bridge between the material and the divine, then screen addiction is dynamite at its base. It destroys the stillness needed to hear your inner voice. It cuts off the reflection required to remember who you are. And it replaces genuine interaction with simulated feedback loops that erode empathy by the minute. It doesn't take malice to weaken a soul, just distraction, relentless, obsessive distraction. And this isn't just philosophical speculation. Neuroscience backs it up. Imaging studies have shown that excessive screen time correlates with underdevelopment in brain areas responsible for empathy, introspection, and ethical decision-making. The parts of the mind that help you feel connected to others, truly connected, are literally withering. These aren't just behavioral shifts, they are neurological transformations with spiritual implications. What you're witnessing all around you is a massive drift toward unconsciousness, toward emotional flattening, toward spiritual sterilization. You may have already noticed it in others, conversations that feel rehearsed, eyes that don't seem to truly register your presence, responses that sound like they were generated by an algorithm. These aren't quirks, they're signals. You are surrounded by people who may look alive, but something central is missing. And once that absence reaches a certain threshold, something terrifying happens. Other influences begin to move in. Just as stagnant water attracts mosquitoes, spiritual vacancy attracts forces that seek to inhabit and direct. These aren't always dramatic possessions with exorcisms and spectacle. Often they're subtle, quiet, just a persistent shift in values, behaviors, and desires that no longer align with any sense of inner truth. That's how these forces work, through suggestion, not imposition. This is why ancient mystics place so much emphasis on vigilance, constant self-awareness, because once that internal flame dims, the body doesn't stop. It just becomes a tool, a vehicle for something else. Whether you call that force cultural programming, mass consciousness, or something more sinister, it doesn't need your permission. It only needs your inattention. And it's this inattention that defines the soulless state more than anything else. A lack of awareness, a lack of authentic presence, a slow and tragic surrender to mechanical living. That's why esoteric schools have always taught the same lesson, repeated in different forms. Remember yourself, not in a narcissistic sense, but in a deeper way. Remember the part of you that is not reactive, not programmed, the witness behind the thoughts, the flame behind the eyes. Once that part fades, so does your humanity. But, and this is critical, it's not irreversible, at least not right away. In its early stages, soul erosion can be halted, even healed, but it takes radical honesty. It takes a willingness to confront the numbness that may have become comfortable. And most of all, it takes conscious effort, not once, but every day. Because the forces working to pull you into spiritual amnesia do not rest. And this is where the work begins, not by hunting the soulless around you, but by inspecting your own connection, your own clarity, your own vitality. Are you living with intention? Are you choosing your thoughts, or are they choosing you? Are your emotions reflections of your inner truth, or echoes of the media you consume? Every moment is an invitation to drift further into automation or to re-anchor into presence. You don't need elaborate rituals to begin. You don't need a guru or a temple or a new set of beliefs. You only need willingness to feel, willingness to sit with discomfort, willingness to step away from noise. These are the first steps in soul retrieval, not from the world, but from yourself. Because here's the most uncomfortable truth of all. It's not only other people who become soulless. It's not just elites or executives or strangers on the street. Anyone can slip into that void. It can happen to the teacher, the healer, the artist, even the seeker, even you. All it takes is long enough without inner light, and the shadows move in. But light is a choice, a discipline, a commitment. And that's the quiet revolution this age demands. Not protest signs or mass awakening, but millions of individuals choosing, quietly, persistently, not to fall asleep, not to be consumed, not to forget who they are. Your soul isn't just your essence, it's your armor. In a world engineered to strip you of it, guarding it becomes the ultimate rebellion. What if the people closest to you, the ones you trust, admire, maybe even love, aren't who you think they are? Not in the usual sense of secrets or lies, but something far deeper, something existential. What if they appear completely normal on the outside, yet carry within them a silence so total, so profound, that it goes beyond emotional detachment? An inner void that isn't the result of trauma or introversion, but the absence of something essential, something sacred. You've felt it before. A handshake that felt too cold, a smile that didn't reach the eyes, a conversation that was perfectly polite, but left you feeling strange afterward, slightly drained, slightly unsettled. You probably chalked it up to mood or misunderstanding. But what if your intuition was warning you about something real? Something your conscious mind didn't have the vocabulary to name? Many esoteric teachings suggest that these encounters are not accidental. They are moments when your spirit brushes against something uncanny, something hollow. They point to a type of human, not metaphorically but literally, who lacks what the ancients called the divine spark. These beings are not malevolent monsters or movie villains. They're often functional, well-adapted, and socially successful, but their inner world is eerily vacant. It's a disturbing notion, to say the least. It challenges everything we're taught about humanity, that all people have value, that all lives hold intrinsic worth, that everyone possesses a soul. But ancient traditions across time and geography, Gnosticism, Hermeticism, Theosophy, shamanic lore, all disagree with this assumption. They speak often in hushed tones of a spiritual hierarchy, a hidden scale by which not every human form contains equal potential. The Gnostics were among the first to classify people in this way. To them, humanity was not a unified species but a layered spectrum. At the top were the pneumatics, beings of deep spiritual insight, able to perceive divine truths and live in alignment with them. In the middle stood the psychics, individuals with dormant potential, still caught in worldly desires but capable of awakening. And at the bottom, the hylix, those who were entirely material, not evil but numb, not damaged but empty. These people, according to Gnostic belief, were fundamentally incapable of perceiving anything beyond the physical world. To them, spiritual realities were nonsense because they couldn't sense them. This wasn't meant to be a judgment, it was a diagnosis. Centuries later, Helena Blavatsky expanded this idea, pulling together teachings from across the mystical world. She described soulless beings not as metaphors for spiritual laziness, but as literal biological entities whose connection to the divine had been severed, or perhaps never established. According to her, these individuals were not rare. In fact, she claimed we encounter them all the time. They move through our cities, sit across from us in meetings, shake our hands and make small talk, and yet, at the deepest level, they are vacant. She used words like living automatons and animated shells. These weren't insults, they were classifications, warnings even. Because while these individuals may not actively intend harm, their very nature makes them susceptible to manipulation. Just as a computer without a firewall is vulnerable to viruses, a human without a soul becomes a conduit, an instrument for influences it cannot perceive or resist. This is where things become more unnerving. If a person has no inner compass, no sense of spiritual right and wrong, they don't resist harmful orders. They don't question unethical systems. They simply execute. They follow. And they often do it efficiently, because there is nothing within them to slow the process. No moral struggle, no haunting sense of conscience. It's no surprise, then, that esoteric thinkers argue these individuals are disproportionately found in institutions of power, not necessarily because they're chosen by design, but because the system itself rewards their qualities. A lack of empathy becomes an asset. Absence of reflection equals faster decisions. No inner conflict means fewer delays. The machinery of modern power doesn't want soulful leaders. It prefers operators, fast, detached, and hollow. This is why some spiritual writers refer to these individuals as biological puppets, not because they're possessed in the dramatic sense, but because they are open channels, empty vessels into which systems, ideologies, or even non-physical entities can pour their will. This sounds dramatic, until you start observing, until you watch certain figures in media or politics or business make decisions with staggering coldness, showing no visible trace of emotional reaction, as if the gravity of their actions never lands. You look into their eyes and you don't see evil, you see vacancy, and something in you recoils, not because you've seen a villain, but because you've glimpsed a void. And yet, the more haunting possibility is not them, it's us. Because the truth is, anyone can slide into this state. Anyone can lose their soul, not overnight, not in some Hollywood-style possession, but slowly, through 1,000 daily choices. Every time you betray your own truth, every time you silence your intuition, every time you choose convenience over integrity, you thin the line connecting you to the divine. Eventually, if you do it enough times, the line snaps, and you may not even notice right away. Your routines continue. Your personality remains intact, but something has left the building, something essential. And in its place, a strange numbness grows. At first, you blame it on stress or work or relationships. But then you begin to notice other things. You don't laugh as deeply. You don't cry as easily. You speak without feeling. You hear without listening. You've become a participant in life, but no longer a witness. And here's the most dangerous illusion of all: the outer self continues. You still post photos. You still have opinions. You still perform your identity. But it's the persona doing it now, not the soul. The outer mask has become the whole face. Carl Jung saw this phenomenon clearly. He warned of the persona people, individuals who lived entirely through their social masks, their roles, their reputations. They were not evil, but they were vacant. In his eyes, they had confused the costume for the being. And once that confusion is complete, the soul begins to starve. So, how do you recognize this condition in others, and more importantly, in yourself? It begins with presence. Truly spiritually alive, people radiate a certain weight, a gravity. Even in silence, you feel them. Their words carry energy. Their gaze has depth. They listen in a way that pulls truth from your bones. They don't just respond, they register. There's something in them that sees through you, not past you. You don't have to be trained in mysticism to recognize it. You just have to remember what real presence feels like. In contrast, the soulless display peculiar traits that go beyond psychology. Their gaze is often flat, their reactions delayed, their speech mechanical. They may smile, but it feels like a reflex, not an emotion. They can mimic care, but it doesn't land. You walk away from the interaction feeling somehow less. Diminished, as if something was taken, even though nothing was said. These aren't just eccentricities, they're spiritual red flags. And perhaps the most telling sign is how they affect your energy. Truly conscious beings uplift you, they inspire you, even in brief encounters. But those without soul tend to drain. You walk away fatigued, confused, perhaps even anxious. Not because of what was said, but because of what was missing. Children and animals often detect this instinctively. A baby may cry in the arms of someone who looks perfectly gentle. A dog may growl without provocation. These reactions are often dismissed. But what if they're sensing something we've trained ourselves to ignore? What if their innocence allows them to perceive what our social filters suppress? In the writings of the mystic George Gurdjieff, there's a phrase that echoes through his teachings: man is asleep. To him, most people were not truly conscious. They lived in a trance, repeating conditioned behaviors without awareness. Only through effort, discipline, and inner work could one awaken and become fully human. This wasn't a metaphor, it was a diagnosis. And if we take it seriously, it reveals a startling truth. The true difference between a human and a soulless being is not biology, but consciousness. Not genetics, but presence. The body can live without the soul. The mind can function without awareness. But the spirit, once severed, takes with it the ability to live fully. So, what keeps that connection alive? What nourishes the soul in a world built to starve it? Stillness, reflection, honesty, creativity, acts of deep attention. Anything that demands presence and repels numbness. But most of all, the choice to remain awake, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. Because awareness is not just a state, it's a responsibility. In a world increasingly filled with soulless mechanisms, systems, routines, devices, even people, your awareness is your weapon. Your attention is your currency. And your soul is your sanctuary. The last sacred ground in a world that wants to pave over everything. Guard it, feed it, listen to it. And when you find it slipping away, stop everything. Go to silence. Return to breath. Seek the light. Not because you're afraid of the dark, but because you remember who you are without it. Because the difference between truly being alive and merely existing isn't visible on the surface. It lives in the gaze, in the stillness, in the choices you make when no one is watching. And if you don't make those choices consciously, something else will make them for you. We often assume the world runs on logic, on systems, on policies, and predictable human behavior. But if you step back, if you look a little closer, you'll notice something more peculiar at play, something darker, more coordinated, and far less human. It's not just corruption, greed, or the occasional bad actor that drives the engine of global decision-making. It's something more mechanical, something that feels deliberately hollow. At first, it's subtle, a policy enacted with clinical coldness, causing mass suffering, yet defended with perfect composure. A corporate decision that lays off thousands in one swift stroke, delivered with a rehearsed smile. Leaders who say the right things, but never seem to feel them. Institutions that behave not just like machines, but like conscious machines, executing complex but compassionless operations with eerie precision. What we're seeing is not a coincidence. According to esoteric thinkers and mystics across centuries, these are signs of something deeper. The systemic positioning of soulless individuals in high places, not just because they clawed their way up, but because the system selects for them. Spiritual vacancy is no longer a flaw, it's a requirement. Why? Because a person with a soul resists. They hesitate, they reflect, they feel guilt, they question orders, they ask uncomfortable questions at exactly the wrong time. In a spiritually inverted world, one that rewards efficiency over empathy, image over essence, those with a functioning soul become liabilities. They clog the gears. They can't be trusted to follow blindly. But a soulless individual, they don't ask. They execute. And so, through a mixture of design and consequence, the hollow rise to power. Whether in government, media, corporate finance, or even religious institutions, you'll find them. People who look completely ordinary, yet operate like extensions of a larger, colder intelligence. They may not realize it themselves. In fact, that's part of the point. It works better if they don't know what they've become. They think they're simply ambitious, driven, or practical. But behind the mask of functionality, the light has gone out. If you've ever been in the presence of such a person, you know the feeling. It's not fear, it's not revulsion, it's disorientation. Something about them seems not quite anchored. Their timing is slightly off. Their responses feel rehearsed. There's a delay between question and answer that makes it seem like they're searching a mental database rather than actually feeling their way through a conversation. The more time you spend around them, the more drained you feel. Not because they're overtly toxic, but because they're spiritually neutral, energetically parasitic. Like psychic black holes, they pull your presence into their void. This isn't metaphor. Sensitive individuals have described these interactions for centuries. Energetically speaking, these people don't just fail to uplift, they deplete. After spending time with them, your thoughts feel scrambled, your confidence dips, your sense of clarity fades, and unless you're anchored in strong inner awareness, you start to doubt yourself. That's the trap. That's how spiritual energy is siphoned, without you ever realizing it. And what's worse, this phenomenon is becoming more common, not because humans are inherently less soulful now, but because the world we've constructed rewards the loss of soul. In fact, it demands it. Take the modern work environment. Deadlines are tight, expectations are high, and compassion is framed as weakness. Workers are encouraged to function like machines, to suppress emotion, to deliver results no matter the human cost. Success is often measured not in creativity or wisdom, but in how efficiently you perform a role. In that framework, soulfulness is inefficient. Feeling is a delay. Reflection is a luxury. And so, over time, we begin to amputate parts of ourselves to fit the role. We cut away the silence that gives birth to insight. We ignore the intuition that tells us, this isn't right. We numb the voice within that says, something here is wrong. And piece by piece, we begin to mirror the very systems we once found inhuman. Not because we've been conquered, but because we've been conditioned. The world doesn't need to destroy your soul directly. It just needs to convince you to forget it exists. Think about how we raise children now. From the earliest age, they're bathed in screens, surrounded by artificial lights, bombarded by constant stimuli. Natural rhythms are ignored. Quiet time is rare. Reflection is seen as boredom. Spiritual imagination is dismissed as fantasy. We don't teach them how to feel. We teach them how to perform. And by the time they're adults, most have never once sat in true stillness, never once asked themselves, who am I beneath the roles? Instead, they build layers of identity, student, professional, consumer, citizen, without ever exploring the core. And if they never turn inward, if they never reconnect with that invisible essence, it begins to atrophy. Eventually, it dies. That's how you create a soulless society, not through war or disaster, but through disconnection, through convenience, through comfort. You don't have to scare people into submission. Just distract them until they no longer remember what they were trying to protect. The spiritual vacuum left behind doesn't remain empty for long. Nature hates a void, and so other forces, subtle, invisible, but deeply real, move in. Some of them are collective egregores, energy forms created by the focused thoughts and emotions of the masses. Others are stranger, older, operating on planes we don't yet understand. But they all share one trait. They love unoccupied vessels. A soulless person doesn't just act out harmful patterns, they amplify them. They become unconscious transmitters of energy that doesn't originate from them. Whether it's a cultural mood, a political ideology, or something darker, they echo it without questioning. They are the perfect foot soldiers for invisible agendas, willing, efficient, and unaware. That's what makes them so dangerous. Not because they have power, but because they don't know who or what is wielding it through them. And these energies are not random. According to occult teachings, there are entire ecosystems of influence beyond the physical plane. Just as there are predators and prey in nature, there are energetic hierarchies in the unseen. And in those hierarchies, unanchored humans are ripe for harvesting. Not in a horror movie sense, but in a far more insidious way. Their thoughts, their emotions, their choices being nudged and shaped without their awareness. And when enough of these individuals cluster together, when they occupy positions of power, they can generate collective fields of influence. Entire organizations, entire governments, even cultural movements can become animated not by soul, but by these non-human energetic currents. These are not conspiracies in the political sense. They are spiritual ecosystems, subtle, complex, and devastatingly efficient. What does that mean for you? It means you're living in a world where the most important battle is invisible. It's not about politics, status, or success. It's about sovereignty, spiritual sovereignty. The ability to remain rooted in your own soul, no matter what the world demands of you. The ability to feel truth in your bones even when everyone around you insists it isn't real. The ability to keep your inner light on when everything outside of you is engineered to dim it. This is not a passive state. It's a discipline, a practice, a choice you make 1,000 times a day. What to give your attention to, what to consume, who to trust, what to believe. Every moment is a fork in the road. One path leads toward automation, the other toward awakening. And perhaps the most important practice of all is discernment. Not just rational discernment, spiritual discernment. The capacity to feel when something is off, even when it looks polished and professional. To trust your instincts when someone's words don't match the vibration behind them. To recognize when you're being manipulated, not just by people, but by energies, frequencies, and ideas that don't belong to you. This isn't paranoia, it's perception. And as strange as it sounds, this kind of awareness is becoming increasingly rare. Most people have been trained to ignore their gut, to defer to experts, to screens, to institutions. They've lost the ability to feel the subtle shift between presence and pretense, between authenticity and programming. But you haven't, or you wouldn't be reading this. Some part of you still senses it, the veil, the distortion, the deep hidden pattern shaping events behind the headlines. You may not know exactly what it is, but you feel it, and that feeling, that quiet, persistent knowing, is your soul reminding you that you are more than a cog in the machine. You are not here to perform. You are here to remember. And as strange as it may seem, that remembering, that conscious reconnection to your essence, is the most revolutionary act you can perform in this world, because a single person, fully rooted in soul, cannot be manipulated, cannot be programmed, cannot be used as a pawn. They become, in essence, immune. Not because they're invincible, but because they're awake. And here's the real secret. When enough people wake up, the entire structure built on spiritual sleep begins to crumble. Not through violence, not through revolt, but through presence. Real presence. The kind that radiates like a beacon. The kind that reminds others of what they forgot. The kind that makes the soulless nervous. Not because you're a threat, but because your existence reveals their absence. You are not powerless in this. In fact, you are the one thing these systems fear the most. A conscious sovereign being, aligned with your soul, aware of your choices, and unwilling to sleepwalk through this life. Because while the soulless may move the gears of the world, they can't create, they can't heal, they can't awaken. Only you can do that. You've heard the whispers, felt the tension behind the noise. You've seen it in people's eyes, the glaze, the emptiness, the flicker of something absent. You've seen the world twisting itself into stranger shapes, faster rhythms, louder distractions, and quieter hearts. What you're experiencing is not just cultural shift. It's not merely stress or disconnection or the cost of modern life. It's something deeper, something ancient, a spiritual forgetting that is reaching its tipping point. The war of this era is not being fought with weapons, though its effects are just as devastating. It's a war on consciousness, a battle to sever you from the most important connection you have, the one between your human self and your divine origin. This war is not broadcast on the evening news. It happens in the silence between notifications, in the space between scrolling and sleeping, in the moment you choose whether to wake up or stay numb. This war isn't loud, it's insidious. It doesn't burn buildings, it hollows out souls, and it begins where people stop listening to themselves. The modern world has been masterfully engineered to distract you from that internal voice. It floods your senses with stimulation, and then sells you relief in the form of products, entertainment, ideologies, and quick-fix philosophies. Everything around you screams for your attention, but almost none of it nurtures your spirit. The more you absorb, the less you hear that whisper from within. The more content you consume, the harder it becomes to distinguish what thoughts are truly yours. But here's the truth most fear to admit. Your soul cannot be stolen, only surrendered. And that surrender happens gradually, not with a ceremony, not with an announcement, but in moments, small moments. When you ignore the part of you that knows better, when you suppress the truth to keep the peace, when you speak words that feel false, wear masks that suffocate your authenticity, follow routines that numb your fire, you lose yourself in fragments. And then one day, you wake up and realize you've been operating on autopilot, not just for hours, but for years, maybe decades. You've been surviving, adapting, performing, but not truly living. And you wonder, where did my fire go? When did I stop feeling deeply? Why do I look alive, yet feel like I'm just drifting? The system calls this burnout, but it's more than that. It's spiritual suffocation, a slow dying of the eternal spark that once lit your inner world. And the tragedy is that it feels normal because it's everywhere. Entire cities built for movement, but not meaning. Schools that teach information, but not wisdom. Jobs that pay the bills, but starve the soul. Even spiritual communities so often turned into brands, performance spaces where authenticity is replaced by repetition. This is the machinery of forgetting. But here's the part they won't tell you. You can remember, not because someone gives you permission, not because a system invites you back, but because your soul has never completely left. It's only been waiting. Beneath the noise, beneath the layers of performance and distraction, it waits, silent, steady, unbroken. And the moment you turn inward, the moment you sit still long enough to really listen, you'll find it again. Maybe in the rhythm of your breath, maybe in the ache in your chest, maybe in a sudden clarity that rises like a storm from nowhere and tells you, without words, that you've been asleep far too long. The journey back isn't easy, but it's not complicated. It begins with honesty, brutal honesty. The willingness to admit that you've been numbed, that you've let the world shape your identity more than your own spirit, that you've conformed in ways that cost you something essential, that you've been pretending to be okay, when in truth, you've been quietly unraveling. This honesty is the first step to remembering. Next comes attention, not the kind you give to a screen, but the kind you give to a flame you don't want to extinguish. Your attention is sacred. Where it goes, your energy follows. Your time, your choices, your essence, all orbit the things you prioritize. If your attention is hijacked by digital illusions and societal noise, your soul remains buried. But if you start reclaiming that attention, bit by bit, you begin to reclaim yourself. And then comes presence, real, grounded, moment-to-moment awareness. It doesn't require incense or rituals or dramatic awakenings. It just requires you, right here, right now, feeling what's true, seeing what's real, being with yourself. Not your image, not your performance, but your actual self. That's how the soul speaks, not through spectacle, but through stillness. In that presence, you begin to see the world as it truly is. You begin to feel the energies behind the words people say. You start sensing the truth behind facades. You recognize when someone is speaking from their soul or from a script. And once you've felt that difference, you can never unsee it. You'll start noticing the hollow ones more clearly, not with judgment, but with awareness. You'll feel the strange emptiness they carry, the mechanical responses, the lack of essence. You'll sense how their presence doesn't feed you, it drains you. You'll start protecting your energy like your life depends on it, because spiritually, it does. But you'll also start recognizing the ones who are awake. Maybe they're rare, maybe they're quiet, but when you meet them, it's like finding fire in the dark. They see you, they feel you, they don't try to fix or perform, they just hold presence. And in their presence, you remember your own. These are your allies, not because they share your beliefs, but because they live from the same place you're trying to return to. They remind you that you're not crazy for feeling what you feel, that you're not alone in this strange awakening. And as you surround yourself with more of that energy, something starts to shift. Your senses sharpen, your emotions return, your creativity begins to stir. You find joy again, not the shallow, performative kind, but the deep, raw kind that rises from within and says, "This is what it means to be alive." And that aliveness is your compass, not a philosophy, not a rule book, but a felt experience that lets you know when you are aligned with your soul. You will lose it again. We all do. But the difference now is you'll know how to return. You'll know the signs when your speech becomes robotic, when your thoughts feel borrowed, when your relationships feel transactional. These are not just mood swings, they're soul signals, alarms that warn you're drifting again, and instead of ignoring them, you'll listen, you'll pause, you'll breathe, you'll reconnect. This is what it means to live with spiritual integrity, not perfection, not purity, but presence. It also means setting boundaries that once felt uncomfortable, protecting your energy even when others don't understand, saying no to environments, relationships, and content that pull you into numbness, choosing to disconnect from a digital world so you can reconnect to your inner one. It means creating space in your life for silence, not just absence of noise, but sacred space where your soul can speak. It means doing less, but being more, trusting intuition over impulse, choosing depth over speed, presence over performance. These are the micro choices that guard the soul. And as you make them more consistently, you'll notice something miraculous. The light in your eyes returns, the stillness in your heart expands. You begin to affect others not with your words, but with your being. You become, without trying, a mirror for what is possible, a reminder that soul is real, that it's not just philosophy, but power. The world around you may not change right away. The soulless systems will continue their dance. The distractions will persist, but they will no longer have the same hold on you. Because once you've reclaimed your soul, you stop looking for permission to be whole. You are whole. And the more people who reach that point, quietly, privately, without spectacle, the more the hidden architecture begins to crack. Not because of protest, but because of presence. Because the foundation of manipulation is unconsciousness. And presence is the one thing it cannot withstand. You are not here to be consumed. You are not here to be programmed, predicted, or perfected. You are here to remember, to protect the invisible fire that makes you more than a machine, more than a role, more than a vessel. You are here to be alive, not just biologically, spiritually, emotionally, fully. So, stop waiting for a sign. You are the sign. The fact that you're still feeling, still searching, still sensing the difference between the real and the artificial, that's proof your soul is intact. So honor it, feed it, listen to it. Because in a world trying to mechanize your humanity, your soul is your final frontier, your rebellion, your proof that something sacred still lives behind the eyes. And if enough of us remember, the system built on forgetfulness will collapse, not with flames, but with light. One light at a time. And if this spoke to something deep in you, if it rang true in the quiet places you rarely visit, then don't let it be a passing thought. Let it be a turning point. From now on, protect your light. Because the world doesn't need more opinions. It needs more souls that refuse to go dark.